So I've been playing a lot of Assassin's Creed Odyssey lately, and there's just something about ancient Greece that is just so much fun. And like there is literally a story for everything in their mythology. So rather than try to cram everything into just one video, this is just going to be talking about the main 12 Olympians. And if this does well, we can always go deeper into them, or we can talk about other gods, and we can even start going into the actual myths. Let's just go ahead and jump right in. Artemis was the goddess of the hunt, the moon, and chastity, and over time she also became associated with childbirth and nature. Artemis was the product of one of Zeus's affairs with a titaness named Leto, and when Hera found out about it, she was obviously furious. She sent a dragon named Python after Leto, and she forbade anyone to give her help. Nobody would take her in except for the island of Delos. And there she gave birth to Artemis while balancing her body on an olive branch. When Hera heard about this, she obviously was even more furious, and she forbade her daughter, who was the goddess of childbirth, into helping Leto further. So Leto was stuck in labor for 9 days until Artemis helped her own mother give birth to Apollo. So then after that, she was declared the new goddess of childbirth. When Artemis was still really young, she asked her father if she would be able to keep her virginity forever, and she was very protective of it. And not only of her own, but she was also very protective of her worshippers. And if something happened with a priestess, she was angry. Of course, given the fact that she was a virgin goddess, she drew a lot of attention from men, both gods and mortals. Like, there was a hunter that stumbled upon her one day and saw her bathing, so she got really mad and turned him into a stag and set his dogs on him. Other people also tried to take advantage of Artemis in compromising situations like this, but they never lived to tell the tale. She had a hunting partner named Orion, and he was probably the closest thing to a lover that she ever had. There was a time he tried to take her clothes off, but she absolutely lost it and ended up killing him. Poseidon was a very violent, ill-tempered, and greedy god, and Homer even described him as having a yell that was as loud as 10,000 men combined. He was the second son of Kronos and Rhea, and he was swallowed, along with his other siblings. He was later saved by Zeus, and he helped defeat the Titans. Once the Titans were defeated, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades decided to draw straws to see who would rule what realm. And Poseidon drew the sea. And he's not just the god of the sea, he's also the god of the earth and horses. So he was really impulsive and hot-headed. He did not like the way that Zeus ruled over everything so arrogantly. So he teamed up with Hera and Athena to try to teach Zeus a lesson, but it did not end well for them. He's most associated with wielding a trident, and he even had the power of striking the earth and causing massive earthquakes. Hades was the firstborn son of Kronos and Rhea, and although technically he's the oldest, when Kronos ate them and then regurgitated them, he became the youngest brother. And then after they defeated the Titans and drew straws, Hades ended up with the underworld. And there aren't too many stories involving Hades, just because he mostly just hung out in the underworld and did his thing. And while he is the god of the underworld, he shouldn't be confused with death itself. So the most known story of Hades is with Persephone. And so he sees this goddess and he thinks she is just so beautiful that he has to have her. So Persephone didn't really care for him, so he came up with this brilliant idea. There was a day that she was picking flowers with some of her nymphs, and this beautiful flower came up in front of her, and so of course she went to pick it. And when she did, the ground opened up and just swallowed her, and he took her to the underworld. Her mother is the goddess Demeter, and she absolutely just was beside herself that her daughter was missing, and everything on Earth was just dead. Eventually they realized that she was in the underworld, and they told Hades that he needed to let her go. But by this point, Persephone had fallen in love with Hades and didn't want to leave. So they came up with the compromise. 2/3 of the year she would live with her mother, and for the rest of the year she would live with Hades. And so during this third of the year, when she's gone, Demeter locks herself away and is so depressed, and that's where we get winter. The story is so complex that it could be a video of its own, but that's just a very basic idea of what goes on with that. So Apollo is the god of basically everything, like right here. But pretty much he's the god of the sun. He is Artemis's twin brother, and she helped deliver him, like I said earlier. He was fed exclusively on nectar and ambrosia for 4 days until he was able to grow stronger. Of course, given the situation of his birth, he really wanted to have revenge on Hera. So, like his sister, he was very skilled in archery, and he went and sought out the dragon that chased his mother when she was pregnant. He eventually chased this dragon to a temple in Delphi and killed it. And of course, because this happened, the temple was then, desecrated. And Zeus was really mad and told him he needed to go fix this. So he, went and cleaned up his mess, but then the temple in Delphi became a temple for Apollo. When Hermes was born, he went and he stole some cattle from Apollo. And so Apollo obviously was really pissed off at him. And as an apology, Hermes took his new invention, which was a lyre, and gave it to Apollo. And Apollo fell in love with it, and he's also one of the gods of music. And he decided he was going to be best friends with Hermes after that. With his love for music, he actually became the leader of the Muses. So, he was also adored across Greece for having the perfect male body, and a lot of the statues of him are with him and being in the nude. Since he was so handsome, he had a lot of affairs, but they didn't really turn out very well. His most famous affair was with a woman named Hecuba, who was the wife of the king of Troy. And she ended up getting pregnant. So I think you can tell how well that turned out for everyone. Aphrodite is the goddess of love, beauty, sexuality, fertility. But there are 2 different versions of her birth. So according to Homer, she is the daughter of Zeus and the Titaness Diana, which would make her, like most gods, a second generation god. Hesiod, on the other hand, claimed that Ouranos, who was the father of Kronos, had his genitalia cut off by his son, and it fell into the ocean, and it created this foam. And out of the foam rose Aphrodite, who was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever seen. I think I like this version better. She was so beautiful, there were only 3 gods that were able to resist her charm: Athena, Artemis, and Hestia. Yes! When she arrived on Olympus, everybody wanted her. And fearing that they were going to have a riot and start a war with each other, Zeus decided to marry her off to Hephaestus, which is the ugliest of the Olympians. This obviously didn't stop Aphrodite from having multiple affairs. She had affairs with pretty much everyone except for Zeus and Hades. And the one she is most known for is Ares. They were caught by Hephaestus, and it did not end well for them, and they were pretty much shamed in front of all the other gods. Now, Aphrodite had a very short temper, and she didn't like being compared to anyone else. There was a mortal woman named Psyche, and Psyche was known to be just beautiful, and everyone worshipped her, and Aphrodite did not like that. She sent her son Eros down to Earth to put a curse on for Psyche that would make it to where no man wanted to marry her. Once Eros got down there, he was going to put this spell on her, but he accidentally pricked her with one of his arrows, and she fell in love with him. So, obviously, he couldn't really have that happen, and he ended up putting another spell on her that would bring her joy in life. But a whole bunch of shenanigans go down, and eventually he falls in love with Psyche, and she falls in love back, and it's a whole thing. So Hera is the wife of Zeus, she is the queen of the gods, and she's also the goddess of marriage. She's the youngest daughter of Kronos and Rhea, so once she was eaten and spit back up, she became the oldest daughter. Bandita! Hera loved animals, and Zeus knew this about her. So she was, out in the woods one day, and she found this injured cuckoo bird. And so she held it close to her to warm it up. Turns out it was Zeus. And Zeus kind of forced himself on her, and it was her first time. And she felt so ashamed that she had been taken advantage of like this, she agreed to marry him. How Zeus, obviously, was not a faithful husband at all. He had multiple affairs all the time. But given the fact that she was the goddess of marriage, she couldn't have affairs. She was stuck in this unfaithful relationship. Everyone that Zeus had an affair with, that she found out about, the mistress and the children, if they came about, would suffer from Hera's wrath, and it was insane. Like, his entire life, she hated Hercules. Like, incredibly. Even though Zeus was not faithful to his wife, he did not want anyone else to touch Hera. Like, he would lose his cool so fast. A mortal once tried to get with Hera, and he was condemned to eternal sleep. And then there was another mortal named Ixion, and Zeus decided to bring him up to Mount Olympus after he was exiled for killing his father-in-law. And rather being grateful that Zeus brought him to Olympus, he was lusting after Hera. And, of course, pissed Zeus off. So Zeus morphed this cloud to look just like Hera and kind of encouraged Ixion to have sex with it. And then he had Hermes have him eternally bound to a wheel of fire. Like I said, Hera hated Hercules. There was a time that Hera raised a storm at sea and tried to sink his ship. When Zeus found out about it, he strung her up by these golden chains, and Hephaestus tried to save his mother, but Zeus threw him off the mountain. Speaking of Hephaestus, he was the god of blacksmiths and fire. And according to Homer, he was one of the sons of Hera and Zeus. And it's not sure if he was born this way or if it was because Zeus threw him off Mount Olympus, but he was disabled. He was a very loving and peaceful god, and he shared his skills with the mortals to improve their craft. He owned his own palace on Mount Olympus, and this is where he would create all of his inventions. He also would create all the weapons for the gods. Now, he is depicted to be very short, stocky, and just ugly. And like I said, he was disabled, probably because Zeus threw him off a mountain. But because he was so ugly, Zeus decided to marry him off to Aphrodite so that there wouldn't be a war, blah, blah, blah. We talked about this. Now, I mentioned that Aphrodite and Ares got caught. So, Hephaestus was pretty suspicious that something was going on. So, there was like this very finely woven net that he created. And when they were in bed together, this net captured them. And he wasn't going to let them go until Poseidon finally convinced him that that was the right thing to do. So Athena was the goddess of wisdom and war, and she was the one that all the Greek heroes would come to and pray to and all that for success in war. Like, she was even feared by Ares. Athena was the daughter of Zeus. Very similar to his father Kronos, Zeus was convinced that his child was going to overthrow him, so he decided to swallow his wife. Afterwards, he had this throbbing headache and it wouldn't go away, and it was just horrible. So eventually they cracked Zeus over the head, and out pops Athena. And she became his favorite child. Athena was another one of the virgin goddesses, and she was never swayed on giving that up. There was one time that Hephaestus tried to take advantage of her when she went to go pick some weapons up, but she was able to fight him off, except that kind of made his swimmers fall from Mount Olympus and hit the earth, and a baby popped out. And Athena decided that she was going to care for this baby in secrecy. Athena also served as the guardian of Athens, and the Parthenon was a giant temple for her. Athena, Athens. Pretty much everybody hated Ares, mortals and gods, except for Aphrodite, of course. But Ares was the god of war, and it was more of the destruction side of it, rather than Athena, who was more of the hero side. He's pretty much the personification of sheer violence and brutality. Are you really surprised that nobody liked him? He was the oldest child of Zeus and Hera, but his father did not love him. Like, there was a time that he was injured in battle, and Zeus called him the most hateful of the gods. And he also told Ares that if he wasn't his son, he would throw him into Tartarus with the Titans. He had at least 3 children with Aphrodite, possibly even up to 8. He also had an affair with this nymph named Harmony, and from said affair became the Amazonian warriors. So Hestia was a pure and peaceful goddess, and she was the goddess of the hearth. And she was born as the first daughter of Kronos and Rhea, but like we've said, when they got eaten and spit back out, they came back in reverse order, so now she's the youngest daughter. Both Apollo and Poseidon wanted to marry her, but she didn't want to choose one and have the other one start a war. So she went to Zeus and asked to remain celibate forever. There was only one time she was ever in danger of losing this vow, and they were at this party, and a drunk fertility god tried to take advantage of her, but a donkey started screaming, and it woke everyone up and they chased him off. So ever since then, donkeys were worshipped for Hestia. She was the personification of the fire burning in every hearth in Greece. And she would receive the first offering, and the families would pour out a little bit of sweet wine for her as well. And these hearths in the city were not allowed to be put out unless it was done ritualistically. And Hestia also didn't have like a cult following or anything, but she could be worshipped at anybody's temple. It didn't matter who it was. Hermes was the son of Zeus and another one of his lovers. He was born at dawn in a cave, but by noon he had already invented the lyre and started singing hymns of his own birth. And by nightfall, he had stolen some of Apollo's cattle because, why not? And then he went back to the cave and put himself back to bed. And then, of course, Apollo was mad about the cattle, Hermes gave him the lyre, and then they became best friends. He was the winged herald for the gods, and he was beloved by all the gods. Like, Artemis taught him how to hunt, Pan taught him how to play the flute. But he was also really mischievous, so he also became the god of thieves. And in some myths, he would outwit the other gods, and this would either be for the benefit of a mortal, or simply because he thought it was funny. Hermes is associated with fertility, but he never got married. And he very rarely had any sort of affairs, and he didn't really have any children. So that's actually kind of surprising. He was also one of the only Olympians who was able to cross from the underworld into the mortal world. So he became known as like the conductor for the souls. He's the only one besides Hades and Persephone who can leave the underworld without any kind of repercussions. And finally, everybody's favorite adulterer, Zeus. So he was born the last child of Kronos and Rhea. And Kronos had already eaten all of his other children, so Rhea decided to try to save Zeus. And she wrapped a stone up in his blanket and gave it to Kronos, and Kronos ate the stone thinking it was Zeus, and she hid him away with nymphs. So he grew up with these nymphs, and then he came up with a plan. He returned to Olympus disguised as a cupbearer and gave this like goblet of wine to his father. His father drinks the wine, it turns out to be poisonous, and that's when he throws up all of his children. And I'm guessing the Rock too? They were all, they came out all ready for revenge. So they fought alongside Zeus and defeated their own father. Once they drew straws, Zeus became the god of the sky. And with that came being the god of sky and thunder, as well as the king of the gods. And Zeus ended up being very much like his father. Like I said, with Athena, he thought she was going to overthrow him, and he ate his wife, she popped out of his head. We've been over this. Hera was actually his, seventh wife. And although he never married anyone else after that, it did not stop him from having all of his affairs. And he would turn himself into all sorts of things to seduce women. There's even a story where he turned into a swan. Zeus was this carefree god, loved laughing out loud, and he was just adored. He was regarded with being wise and just and merciful, and mortal kings would brag that they were descendants of Zeus because it was this huge honor. And he was pretty much the embodiment of ancient Greek culture. And while he was revered for being this great guy, he had a nasty temper and it could just flip on a switch quickly. He could just send down his lightning bolts and cause this horrible storm that would just wreak havoc on all the mortals. Do you have a favorite god? Or maybe you have a favorite myth? Let me know down below in the comments. Also, make sure you hit that like button because it really helps me know if you guys like this kind of content. Also, make sure you subscribe and you'll be notified every time I upload a video. Bye!